The next question says, what are the best practices for writing test cases? So we know the test case, which is a document in which we begin to test our software or begin to design our testing for this software. So what are the practices that you should follow in order to test this system using your test cases? Well, there are many practices, but those are some of them which you can say in your interview. The first, for example, is to write test cases with end user's perspective. So if I'm testing an e-commerce website, I should begin to think about the end user. What are the scenarios that he is going to go through inside this software? Also, I should write test steps in a simple way that anyone can follow them easily. We have a field inside the test case which is called the testing steps. Those steps should be clear so that the person who is going to execute the test case can read them and follow them easily. I should also make the test cases reusable. So for example, if I'm testing login using a valid email and a valid password, in the password field, if I write the password, for example, 123456, okay, and then the tester who is going to execute the test case changes the password. So in this case, the valid password is not the same old password, which was 123456. So in this case, test case is not reusable, okay? It can be used one time, and after changing the password, you cannot use it again. But if I write in this example a high-level test case in which I say a valid password and I don't specify what is this password, in this case, this test case is reusable. I should also set a priority for each test case so that when we execute the test cases, we begin by executing the high priority test cases first, then the low priority test cases. In the test case document, I should provide a description, test data, expected result, preconditions, and the post conditions of each test case. I should also write invalid test cases. I shouldn't only write valid test cases, which the user is going to do. No, I also should think about invalid test cases, okay, the negative scenarios like we explained earlier. You should also follow proper naming conventions. So for example, don't say test login, okay, or login functionality. This test case title or name is not specific. I don't know what you are going to test inside the login functionality. But if I say login with a valid username and a valid password, so in this case, this is a good name of the test case. Also, you should review the test cases regularly and update them if necessary. So if there is any regression in the system, if the developer added some functionalities, if he edited the old functionalities, in this case, I should review my test cases and begin to edit them. And we call this activity test case refactoring or test case maintenance. The next question says, what is the testing suite or the test suite? So we know that each test case is added to a folder, okay, or to a repository, which is called a test suite. So the group of test cases which test the same functionality are called the testing suite. So like we see here, the test suite is a container that has a set of tests which helps testers in executing and reporting the test execution status. So for example, we have the login functionality test suite. When we are reporting our test status, we say that the login test suite had 100 test cases, 90 of them passed, 5 failed, and 5 blocked. In this case, I can understand the status of this functionality or this module. Any test case can be added to multiple test suites. So for example, we might have a test suite for login with Facebook and a test suite for forgot password, okay? And a test suite also for login with email. So the forget password functionality or test case might be added to both of the test suites for Facebook and email. In some tools like TestLink, for example, like we explained earlier, the test suites are created before creating the test cases. So in some tools, we begin to create our test suites and then add test cases to them. In other tools, we begin to create our test cases and then add our test suites to them, okay, or add them to the test suites. So like we see here, this is an example, and this happens in TestLink, for example. We create a test plan, then we create a test suite, then in each test suite, we begin to create its test cases and add their test data. The next question says, what is the test environment. So the test environment is the setup of software and hardware for the testing team to execute the test cases. So for example, I designed a test case for the login functionality. This test case is going to be executed, okay? For example, I'm going to execute it on Windows 10 and using Wi-Fi network using Google Chrome browser. So this is my testing environment. Another tester is going to execute the same test case on an Android native application on an Oppo mobile, for example, with Android 10 using mobile data. So this is another test environment for the same test case. So in order to summarize the definition of the test environment, we can say that the test environment supports test execution with three things: hardware, software, and network. So like we said, for example, if I'm testing an iOS application, the hardware might be an iPhone 10 or iPhone X, the software is iOS 13 or iOS 14, and the network is Wi-Fi or mobile data. So like we see here, we have an example of an environment configuration for a web-based application. We have the web server, for example, this is ITS Apache, the database MS SQL, the operating system is Windows or Linux, and the browser is Internet Explorer or Firefox, and we have a version of Java. This is an example of a test environment. The test environment that you are going to use should be very similar to the real environment that the user would use the software in.